Today, we're diving into a book that tries to build a psychological framework for one of the world's most talked about leaders. Now, the goal of this source material isn't to be political. It's really to ask one simple question. Is there a predictable pattern here?
So, let's just start with the central question the book asks. Is it even possible to forecast what a leader will do? The author's whole argument is, yes, it is. If you can understand the underlying system, you can start to anticipate the output. And this quote is really the guiding principle for the entire book. It's stated right up front. The goal here isn't to judge or to justify anything. It's to analyze behavior so that you can predict it. It's a very clinical, almost detached way of looking at a very controversial figure.
Okay, so how exactly does the author suggest we do that? Well, the entire book is actually built around a single, very powerful metaphor for understanding the subject's mind.
And there it is. The author frames this entire analysis as a user manual. It's designed to show us how the system works, what inputs lead to what predictable outputs. It's kind of like an engineer's approach to psychology. According to the book, every good user manual has to start with the hardware's basic design. So the author begins with what they call the formative wounds. These are the early life experiences that supposedly wrote the leader's psychological source code.
The book really hones in on these 4 events as being critical. His mother's long absence, right in the middle of a key developmental window, a father who, according to many biographies, demanded that his sons be ruthless aggressors, being sent away to military school, and, of course, the death of his older brother, which the author frames as this constant cautionary tale about what happens when you're perceived as weak.
Now, to give this a proper clinical lens, the author brings in the concept of adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. This is a real-world public health tool that measures the long-term effects of childhood trauma. And the science is pretty clear. The higher your ACE score, the greater your risk for negative outcomes later in life.
Based on all those biographical accounts, the book estimates an ACE score of 6 for Trump. And here's where it gets pretty startling. The author points out a correlation from public health data. A score of 6 or higher is statistically linked to a life expectancy that is shorter by 2 decades.
So the author then takes that ACEs framework and boils it all down into 3 core wounds. The phantom mother supposedly taught the lesson that the people you rely on can just disappear. The cruel father taught that weakness is a death sentence and only total dominance keeps you safe. And the destroyed brother, well, he served as a lifelong, terrifying example of what happens if you fail to learn that lesson.
Okay, so if that's the source code, how does it actually translate into action? The book argues it creates a core operating system. Basically 3 programs that are always running in the background, dictating almost all behavior.
So program number 1 is called the dominance machine. The author describes this as a deep psychological need to be seen as the best, the biggest, the winner, always. And this connects right back to that wound from the cruel father where the lesson was that only total dominance ensures survival. So the key point here is, this system doesn't just want to win. The book argues it's psychologically incapable of processing defeat. A loss would be a total system crash.
And you can really hear this programming in action. Remember this famous line from the Republican National Convention? Notice it wasn't "we can fix it," it was "I alone can fix it." According to the book, that is the dominance machine speaking its native language.
Program number 2 is the vengeance algorithm. This thing processes any criticism, no matter how tiny, as a critical error that demands a response. The author argues this is a direct reaction to a childhood feeling of powerlessness. It's a simple but powerful script. If input equals criticism, then output equals retaliation. Every time. The book even breaks down the algorithm's simple rules. First, no slight is small enough to be ignored. Second, the response has to be completely overwhelming to reestablish dominance. And third, grievances never expire. The system has a very, very long memory.
And what's really interesting is how this psychological pattern, according to the book, was eventually turned into a direct political promise. The personal need for vengeance was literally marketed as a collective one. It became a core part of the political brand.
And the third and final program is the loyalty trap. This is described as a complete one-way street. It demands total personal loyalty from everyone, but according to the source, it offers absolutely none in return. The book traces this all the way back to the phantom mother wound, which created a system where loyalty is demanded to prevent abandonment, but it's never actually trusted or returned. It is purely transactional.
So how does this trap actually work? The book lays it out pretty clearly.
It starts with a simple demand. Then, each act of compliance makes the next, bigger demand that much harder to refuse. Over time, any act of independence gets redefined as betrayal, and the moment a person's utility runs out, they are discarded. Just like that.
So, the book has laid out the wounds, the source code, and the operating system. This final section is all about the ultimate goal of the user manual, using all that knowledge to actually make predictions.
The author argues that this whole operating system really exists to protect a series of core myths. This slide shows the juxtaposition the book creates. On one side, you have the public mythology, and on the other, you have the documented reality as presented by the author. The book basically suggests this entire psychological structure is one giant defense mechanism. And this is where the book tries to anchor its analysis in some hard data. It points to massive court judgments, thousands of cataloged claims, and, of course, felony convictions. The author presents these numbers as real-world output from that psychological operating system we just talked about.
So what is the core prediction? The book points to statements exactly like this one. The author's interpretation is that a second term would feature the exact same psychological patterns, but this time with fewer guardrails to hold them back. The argument is that when the dominance machine faces threats, like the ones on the last slide, its response isn't to adapt, it's to escalate. And that phrase, no choice, is seen as key. It's not a political statement, it's a description of the system just running on autopilot.
And this, right here, is the fundamental argument of the entire book. These behaviors aren't choices that can be changed with new information or persuasion. They're presented as a fixed part of the psychological architecture. The bottom line is, you can't fix the machine, you can only read the manual. The book concludes by setting up this final, pretty dramatic conflict. On one side, you have a psychological operating system that literally cannot process loss or limitation. And on the other side, you have reality, which is, full of both. A collision, the author writes, is absolutely unavoidable.
And that leaves us with the book's final, pretty provocative thought. It presents the trajectory as fixed. So the only remaining questions are, when will this collision between psychology and reality actually happen, and what will the consequences be? It's a really stark conclusion to a very stark analysis.